UK Column Live. It's the 12th of September 2013. Myself and Brian Gerrish, Mike Robbins are here in Plymouth as always, and later on Brian will be joined by Kevin Bull for some quite a serious subject. Afternoon, Brian. What's the weather doing?
Well, the weather at the moment is just grey, not too cold, so it's typically Plymouth, England, I think, and we'll see what happens over the weekend. But I think we should also give a mention to Neil Foster, who's sitting quietly in the studio watching today's broadcast. So welcome to you, Neil. Neil unfortunately won't be on camera until we get a bigger studio, but we'll carry on from there. Well, we thought we'd open today with good news story and really common sense. We've got this very, very brave police sergeant, Dave Sutton, who dived into a swimming pool to rescue a young girl. He had to stand in the water for quite some time and get some scissors in order to cut her free from the circulation system of the pool. But we'd like to say well done to this very brave man, and isn't it good to see somebody using common sense and morality
before health and safety.
Before health and safety. So this is what life should be like, and of course in seeing an incident like this we're reminded of exactly what health and safety and political correctness is all about, to stop us behaving as normal human beings. Well, there's much going on at the moment, so we haven't been surprised at all to see the papers now coming back on stream with Madeleine McCann, and there's a court case going on where Kate McCann is taking the former police chief who was accused of printing a book with outrageous lies. So this is a family that's constantly involved in libel actions around their daughter. We're simply going to say it's fascinating how at the exact time that we have Syria going on, we have the BBC collapsing, and as we're going to be hearing, we've got all sorts of trouble with our politicians, that up comes what has been a major story. And we will say, respecting the seriousness of the case with Maddie McCann, why is it that the world is focused on this one child, whereas all the others are thousands of children that go missing? We don't see the same publicity. Okay, let's just move on to the next article here. Well, maybe this takes us into part of it. We've got MI5 and the special branch talking about covering up of Cyril Smith's abuse of boys. And this is a very, very interesting article. And really what we think, what comes out of it, we think at least, is the fact that somebody is finally starting to admit that there was a cover-up in order to protect this gentleman. And the cover-up was at sufficiently high level that MI5 gets involved. So let's just have a think about the trouble with Princess Diana.
Yeah.
So what was actually going on here, and who in the highest levels of the establishment would want to protect paedophiles? Well, we know we can't trust the British establishment, and probably there's no better example than Hillsborough, where the police and the high levels of the political arena covered up what was actually happening. So we shouldn't be surprised that paedophilia would also be covered up. But we were very interested by the comments made by Assistant Chief Constable of Lancashire Constabulary, Andy Rhodes, who told delegates at a child sexual exploitation conference near Blackburn that gaining knowledge of the subject and acting upon it was the key to tackling the problem. Now, our response to this is that the evidence as to what's going on, the scale of the exploitation of children, and that we have paedophiles within the very public authorities tasked to protect the children, is right in front of our eyes. The problem is that we clearly have people who are paedophiles who can control police, courts, and some of the charities which say they're there to assist. Mike, if you just bring that back for a second, thank you. At the bottom, he makes another comment, which I think is extremely interesting. So Mr. Rhodes says there are a lot of leaders around the country now becoming aware and increasing their knowledge about what sexual exploitation is all about in their areas. Now, I'm not sure what this gentleman is saying, and I'd particularly be interested to know who the leaders are. But to me, this seems to be a message to say, well, actually, we know the sexual exploitation of children is going on, and we don't want to stop it. You just need to be more aware how effective it is.
Do you think the leaders could be common purpose leaders, Brian?
Well,
that could. Think?
I think that's part of it, but we're constantly seeing across government departments talk about leaders, these people who are specially selected to tell us how to run our lives. But there's something very interesting going on in the language here. We are not seeing the government react properly to the stealing and abuse of children. We're not seeing the police react properly to it. Mike Robinson and myself went into a Plymouth police station to report that a 3-month-old boy was going to be abused some time ago. We returned to say that the child had been abused, and we ended up with a police sergeant shouting at us to get out of the interview room. So there's something very, very dark and dirty going on. And of course, as Senator Savray has said, governments love paedophilia because that is the means by which people can be controlled. Mm-hmm. And perhaps we should be a little bit more searching about what the charities are really up to. And the Sutton Guardian here has printed an article where teenagers who contacted Childline said they felt that their report of sexual assault was treated as a joke. And I think at the moment we are much too happy to accept that we have a huge charitable sector saying they're there to help children. What are they really doing, and who is making the money out of their services? But of course, if we look at politicians, do we trust them?
Oh, no, we don't. The IAPSA, the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority, are about to release the latest details on MPs' expenses. And this Mirror article had a look back over some of the most stupid of claims. We've had a guy called Peter Viggers, who had a floating duck island, £1,645 for a 5-foot shelter for the pond, and actually spent £30,000 over 3 years just for garden equipment. We had dear Ian Duncan Smith, who put in expenses for £39 for breakfast. A guy called Andrew Sellers, who put in a 55p expenses claim for a cup of Horlicks. And James Harbonaut from Hampshire put in a £43.56 expenses claim for a garlic peeler, which he bought on QVC. But I decided to have a little look at the IPSA and who was behind it. And the first gentleman I found was Sir Ian Kennedy, and he's the chief executive of the IPSA. He's connected to the Ford Foundation, Yale. He was there for 9 years. He was a member of the General Medical Council, a member of the board of UK Research Integrity Office, and also a biohealth advisory group on AIDS. Now, this is the best bit. In 1997, in a government inquiry that gave approval to xenotransplantation, he was on this board, which is the use of animal to human transplants, which was a very interesting thing I found. But he's also involved in the research of biological and medical research and the Wellcome Trust. So this is the chief executive who's looking after the MP's expenses. And
we've got a few more. We're going to encourage people to go and actually have a look at this site and just see who these people are that say that they're there to keep an eye on our politicians.
Yeah, Elizabeth Palmer, I had a look at her, and she's on the council of Chatham House. And I put her name into the Common Purpose. And there is an Elizabeth Padmore on there who comes up on Common Purpose, and we're not.
Well, we think it's the same lady, but we may be wrong. But our point here is that we've got politicians, they call it fiddling expenses. We say it's fraud and corruption. But when we delve into who's actually regulating, we find people who are so unbelievably networked into the establishment. How can we have confidence that they are themselves totally independent and unswayed in their role?
Exactly, and if she is involved in Common Purpose, then she's a leader picked out, isn't she? So how
does it work?
How does it work?
Yeah. Well, just a couple of comments on the press. The Guardian has run a couple of interesting articles. Richard Desmond, Channel 5 owner, has warned of regulation threat to public service broadcasters. And he says channels such as his face uncertain future trying to compete against the big rivals, Sky B, Google and Amazon. So the minimum is turbulence in the media industry. And then, of course, in the background, we've still got Mr. Murdoch, who has been advising, I believe, on what should have been happening politically in Australia, but very, very powerful people who are manipulating not only the companies themselves, but, of course, the content. And we still have the issue of the recording of 20, I think it was Sun journalists, with a briefing from this gentleman. But well done, The Guardian, because they go on. So we've got Maria Miller here, the Culture Secretary. She's issuing a final warning to the BBC Trust. But she says that action is needed after a string of controversies, including 60 million payoff. So the Guardian language, very, very interesting, is that fraud and corruption has now become controversy. And we just highlight this by saying, well, we're watching criminal fraud and corruption in the BBC.
And paedophilia.
And paedophilia, thank you. And we'd like to know when government ministers are going to start to act. Presumably that might be after they've put their own house in order. But the nonsense goes on, and the Telegraph here reporting about a rude tweet sent out from BBC Newsnight boss Ian Katz to Labour MP Rachel Reeves. There's been a lot of these kind of reports in the paper. Our opinion on this is it's trying to give substance to the fact that the government would love to get in draconian controls over the website, social media. The Chinese are doing it, and I can see that David Cameron could get a little bit upset if people start to talk about him behind his back. But we'll watch what happens on that. Now, more serious subjects probably is vaccines.
Another day, another tragic story coming out about the HPV vaccine. 27-year-old girl called Brittany Fish was full of energy back in 2007, vibrant, full of life. She was then vaccinated with the Gardasil HPV vaccine, and she is now reduced to a near vegetable state. She can't get out of bed today, suffers regular seizures and collapses very often. And this is just every single day now we seem to be coming out with another story, a tragic story of the dangers that are going into these vaccines. So please think carefully, speak to whoever you need to be if you have had letters home to have this Gardasil vaccine.
And do your own
research.
Do your own research and challenge your own doctor as to what they do and do not know about the dangers of vaccines. But of course, children are totally in the firing line, as we've reported earlier in this week. But now the subject of what we're going to teach young children is coming to the fore again, and this is Michael Gove.
It is. 130 teachers have called for schooling to be delayed. Education experts have stated that kids should not be starting school until at least 6 or 7. Michael Gove last night dismissed the advice, calling it misguided. The current law stated that children at the age of 5 must be at school full-time and first assessed at the age of 7. But dear old Cleggy proposes that the testing should be start when actually they're 5. Experts have warned that this promotes stress and fear around learning for young children. But in Scandinavia, children have the chance to enjoy their younger years, and they've put off delaying school until 7 years of age. Even Sir Al Endley Green, former Children's Commissioner, said that countries where kids start school a lot later do a lot better. Yes, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, it's... Sorry, excuse me. It is absolutely normal in most European countries that children don't start until 7. Poland, it's the same. France, it's the same. Germany, it's the same. They tend to have kindergarten for younger children. But really, I think that the main reason that Gove wants children in school at the age of 4 is, of course, because that's what gets children away from their parents at the earliest possible stage. Their parents can stay on the hamster wheel, which keeps the of part-time jobs and so on. So I don't think that he's really considering the children with this one.
Well, let's follow it through, because Mr. Gove is very active in other areas as well. And again, The Guardian here, Food Bank Britain. This is the state of Britain after years of combined Labour, Lib Dem and Conservative policy. We have people who can't feed themselves. Food Bank Britain, I didn't ask to be ill. And this week, Michael Gove claimed that people who use food banks have only got themselves to blame for mismanaging their finances. So let's have a look at this man. Well, here he is. And, of course, he was more concerned with launching attacks on Syria than he has been in people feeding themselves. We would say this is a very, very dangerous individual. But the plot thickens because we've also learnt that Mr. Gove's wife has now become a columnist in the Daily Mail. And this is one of her first articles. And if you go and have a read of this, she will be telling you in great detail about how the Gove household works, how it's a very busy place, how her dishwasher works extremely hard, and how she copes with the children. So the Mail paying for this apparently, but it gives us a very interesting snapshot on the hypocrisy of Gove, who is not interested in people in genuine poverty, but he's very happy to be boasting, presumably, about the quality of his kitchen and dishwasher. We couldn't make this up, really, could we? Well, Mike, that probably leads us in very nicely to the economy.
Yeah, well, Mark Carney has been in front of the Treasury Select Committee this morning. I haven't seen everything that he said yet because it was pretty much going on as we speak. But he has said this, that the economy is picking up and the stimulus is working. And while it's early days, we expect as well that we are consistent with the path of returning inflation to 2%. So the economy is doing really well, and that's fantastic. But unfortunately, Oxfam doesn't agree because they've produced a report today pointing out that if parliaments or governments around Europe continue with this austerity policy, that by 2025 we will have 25 million new poor in Europe. And so maybe Mr. Carney thinks that's a good thing. I don't know. But, we're seeing since 2008, we're seeing this massive spread between the rich and the poor and the removal of the middle classes. Again, maybe that's the policy of the central banks, but Oxfam pointing out the dangers there.
Can I just bring up a couple of comments that we've got coming in at the moment? People are really reacting to this subject. So we've got everything from Syria has subsidised bread to Mr. Gove looks like a Thunderbird puppet. I think I must agree with that. But also people saying they'd like to effectively drag him into an alleyway in order to show him the reality of what's happening around the country. So it's quite clear that people out in the wider public are really understanding the state of the economy. So what is this, Mike? We're just being fed a pack of lies, basically.
Absolutely, yes. In the meantime, Demos has raised its ugly head again today, and they're trying to push the notion that really there's a whole new housing market needs to be created for pensioners who want to downsize. So, once people get to a certain age, in their early 60s, whatever it is, they really just can't manage that big family home anymore. They really just need to downsize, move into something that will make them feel a lot happier, so they're really arguing here for a whole new tranche of house, buying a new type of house building exercise in order to build, I suppose, what might be estates just for older people. I don't know what their aim is there, but they're really saying, if you're gonna reinflate this housing bubble, you've got to look at the whole housing ladder, not just getting people on at the bottom, but you've got to work out how you're going to move people off the top. At some point, maybe they just are going to say that to get people off the top of the ladder, you need to start killing them or something.
Well, the minimum we can say of this is, of course, Demos is a Marxist-based think tank, and of course what they are really doing is stripping away money which would pass on to families and children. So we're asset stripping older people, I think, is the direction we're going in.
It's interesting that you say that about Demos, because this morning was the first time I heard them described as a cross-party think tank.
Cross-party Marxist think tank. Well, that is right, of course, because we've now got David Cameron following Saul Alinsky or promoting Saul Alinsky policy. And many people think that Cameron's big society has simply disappeared off to the side, when in fact he is rapidly implementing it. And we're going to be covering in future editions exactly what's going on with the so-called third sector social entrepreneurs. But we've got two Marxist brothers in the Miliband's running the Labour Party.
And Zionists.
And Zionists. And we've also got Nick Clegg, of course, one of Leon Britton's boys, who has been staunchly for the European supranational state, which many would regard effectively as a new form of communism or communitarianism. So I don't think we should be surprised that demos is being pushed forward. And of course, we should also remember the links through to the political charity Common Purpose. Well, Syria, of course, is not going to go away. And the Telegraph here has been commenting on the fact that US starts delivering weapons to the rebels. I don't believe that headline at all, because I think this has been going on for many months, and we know that Britain has had special forces on the ground in Syria for many months. So this is mix and match of the truth and propaganda by the Telegraph. But I was quite interesting. I think this has come from the Telegraph site. It might have been from the Mail, so I'll apologise that I'm not sure on that. But what was fascinating was that we've got comment from Piers Morgan and Gary Kasparov. So I have to say, I think this is the Mail. The Mail apparently thinks that we should be concerned about what Piers Morgan thinks or doesn't think, and indeed the same for Mr. Kasparov. So why are they putting it out in this way? I think this is more attention on the social networks.
I mean, Obama and Cameron have been made to look an absolute fools, haven't they? You know, after what Putin's
they've been outmanoeuvred,
totally
basically.
Outmanoeuvred.
So I've probably called this one up a little bit early, Mike. You've got William Hague here.
No, it's fine. William Hague was in Parliament this morning giving a briefing on the Syria situation. No need to go into any detail on it, other than to say, aside from the usual rhetoric, he absolutely he outlined some of the so-called humanitarian aid that is being given, and he specifically talked about a £20 million tranche of aid that's being given to the so-called rebels, where he was describing that they were going to be getting chemical warfare suits and various other stuff, apparently to protect themselves against chemical attack. But this is supposedly humanitarian aid, when in fact it's clearly what you might call non-lethal military aid, in fact.
Why are they Sorry, Brian. Why are they stepping all this off? Assad has agreed to hand things over, and they're gagging so much for this war, aren't they? So it seems. I mean, they're just stepping it all up by sending these chemical weapon suits when he's already agreed.
Well, it's a good question, because Hague was absolutely he was arguing quite strongly that he doesn't believe that Assad will do this, so that's really the reason they're pressing on regardless. They appreciate that they've been stopped in their tracks with regard to bombing Syria, but they're pressing on with every other possible solution that they have.
Well, I did hear a bit of him speaking, and of course he was talking about communication systems. He was also talking about bulletproof vests, and he was also, I think, mentioning four-wheel drive vehicles. So in my book, what is being given to the rebels is clearly equipment to help them fight. This is not food, blankets and medicine to treat wounded, sick people.
I wonder if you've just gone and spent a lot of money at the Excel Arena, which we're going to be covering in a minute.
We will.
But in the meantime, then, in the New York Times this morning, Vladimir Putin had an opinion piece or a plan, and really he's arguing quite strongly, as you would imagine, that this whole business needs to be stepped back and allow this process that it's interesting, isn't it, that it's suddenly become Russia's proposal, when in fact it was John Kerry's proposal in the first place. Russia just jumped on it and said, let's go with this. But suddenly in all the press it's being described as Russia's proposal. Anyway, a very interesting development, I think, that Vladimir Putin is being published in the New York Times.
So do you think that the game was to give Obama a way out?
I was speaking to Neil earlier on, and that's certainly the conclusion that Neil has, and I would agree with that. There's there's a real question about whether that was a slip of the tongue, and we did say this I think on Tuesday when Jon Snow had tweeted on his Twitter account that it was an arrogant slip of the tongue, and I don't think it was an arrogant slip of the tongue. So the question then in my mind was it prearranged, and if so, who was sort of behind it? And we know that the Joint Chiefs of Staff are absolutely against Obama's plan to bomb Syria. We know that Kerry himself must be feeling the complete hypocrite after taking Assad out to dinner on a number of occasions, and then also everything that he said. I mean, when Patrick was on the programme, we showed that little video clip where Kerry had absolutely stated that he had done the constitutional research and had come to the conclusion that it would be unconstitutional to do this kind of thing. And here he is a few years later doing it, right? And he was making a real point of the fact that he's a constitutional expert personally. So I do wonder. It was clear. My feeling is it was prearranged, but who was behind it, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, again, in the shout box.
Yep.
I'm getting the terminology right slowly. We're seeing people talk about Wallace and Gromit politics. So it's clear to us that out there people have totally seen through this presentation of what the political truth is. It's too close to Iraq. We're following the same process. They've been caught out and now they're floundering around. Yeah.
Right, well, in Foreign Policy magazine then here we've got this article. There's almost no chance Russia's plan, so it's Russia's plan again for Syria chemical weapons will work. Really, they are hoping against hope that it will not work because they want to press ahead, so they're hoping that it won't work. Well, Kerry and Lavrov, of course, are meeting in Geneva today to discuss exactly how this process is going to work. We've got the French attempting to push a resolution in the United Nations saying that they've got 15 days. And of course, people aren't falling for that one. But this article in Foreign Policy magazine, typical of some of the commentary and rhetoric around the place. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, excuse me, I picked up on this one from the Independent here. We've got Ian Birrell saying, let's open our borders to Syria's refugees. Britain's one of the world's wealthiest nations, apart from the fact we can't feed ourselves. And he thinks that we should show an example to other wealthy nations by opening our door to Syria's refugees. Now, on one hand, we could say, well, of course, as a nation, we should show compassion for other people in distress. But if we think about the reality, there's now talk of 2 million, I think it is, displaced people. Yeah. And
4.2 million displaced, and 2 million have actually fled into the Lebanon and the surrounding countries.
Right, so, and this man is suggesting, well, let's not worry about who's creating the violence. Let's not concentrate on what's causing the problem. Let's simply say, well, we're going to open the gates in Britain and that's going to solve the problem. So
there shouldn't be refugees anyway.
if the problem was dealt with.
Exactly.
Well, on the sidelines and getting very, very little mention in the mainstream press, of course, we've got Israel. And this was quite an interesting article where it's emerged that Israel's had to pay out £714,000 in compensation to the family of a prisoner who committed suicide. But this is prisoner X, the man incarcerated by the Israelis in secret, held in secret, the death in secret. And the Israelis are saying, well, we can't reveal actually what's gone on because this would damage national security. So here we've got a classic example of the fact that Israel is not playing straight in what it's actually up to, but they do appear to be particularly nervous of whatever was going on around this man. So this is clearly a story to read. And of course, it was The Guardian yesterday that published a document showing an agreement between the NSA, the US NSA, and Israel, in which top secret signals intelligence was going to be passed between America and Israel, and the document admitted that details of US citizens and other US assets may be passed to the Israelis. So have a look at that Guardian article as well. But of course, the mainstream press, as usual, are simply not commenting at all on the real role of Israel on the edge of the Syrian conflict.
Yeah, of course, most their bosses are, from that, from Israel.
From that area.
Exactly.
Well, should we trust the UN? I think you're going to say no.
No, not at all. After the story we did yesterday on the bedroom tax and the UN inspector, this story's come out in the Mail about Raquel Rolnick, who apparently is a Marxist. She's an architect and urban planner and a follower of candomblé, which is mainly practiced in Brazil. It involves rituals, sacrifices of mineral, vegetable and the animal kingdom. It follows healing and dance. Apparently she offered up an animal sacrifice to Karl Marx. But interesting in this article, at the bottom, it says that in 2001, Peter Mandelson's partner, Reinaldo Avelio da Silva, had engaged with a witch doctor to put a hex on political enemies. But anyway, the Tories are now out for blood, excuse the pun, and Tory MP Stuart Jackson has called her a loopy Brazilian lefty after her comments on the bedroom tax.
Just got a picture of her, Mike, we'll just bring on screen. Now, on one hand, we could simply laugh at this article, but again, we're intimating the Marxist links, which we're seeing in other areas. And of course, many people are totally unaware of the background of the United Nations, in particular, how deeply entrenched people with some quite extreme views on what health really means. Does that mean political health or physical health? They believed it to be political health. And now we're starting to see some really dark stuff. Neil, if I might just ambush you, you mentioned a gentleman who made a quote to say that in the future, people who were going to be inducted into the New World Order needed to support Satan. Was I correct? Lucifer. Right. David Spangler's the man. So if you don't know much about the background to the UN and what it's really standing for, we believe a one world system of government. Have a look and do some research for yourselves. But the arms industry, of course, is doing exceptionally well from trouble in the Middle East.
Yes, indeed. So this is Lockheed Martin. They're planning to create 200 new jobs. And this follows on really from the document, the joint arms industry government document that we highlighted a couple of days ago. So they're saying, really, a $100 million contract won with the new NATO headquarters in Brussels. So that's what they're up to. But in the meantime, we do have some reasonably sensible comment promoting the arms exports as sheer madness. I mean, the key point that's being made in this post, and I think everybody should read it, really is that Britain is basing its whatever productive industry we have left, basing our productive industry on killing people. And perhaps we need to be thinking about how we develop the planet rather than destroy it. So, it's just a slight difference in approach, and perhaps our government has it wrong. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to say we know they've got it wrong, Mike. That's why we're here. But we're going to keep on the subject. This is what they've really been up to.
Yeah, there's been a large event going on at the Excel Arena in London. It started on the 10th of this month. It's running through to tomorrow. And it's a defence and systems event. And as I said, it's at the Excel. The event is featuring a range of weapons and security and defence hardware. And this article is highlighting how two of the exhibitors have been thrown off the land and for exhibiting torture items such as irons, leg irons, gang chains, shackles, shock batons such as stun guns, electric shock and dart guns. And there is a statement that comes up from the event organisers, which I think we've got there, Brian. We should be able to highlight
bring that up on the screen. Yeah.
We can confirm that Chidin My Way International Trading Co. and Magforce International have been ejected from the DSEI and have been found with literature in breach of British law. This action highlights our commitment to ensuring that all equipment, services, promotional material, documentation and anything else displayed at DSEI complies with domestic and international law. Enforcing the law at DSEI is the responsibility of HMRC, who have teams on the site throughout the show for this purpose, and it goes on. So these companies who are making torture items were displaying, but they have actually been thrown off. The exhibition has gone into a number of zones, and they've been split into many zones, such as the air zone, the naval zone, security zone, the unmanned system zone, which we can only think of the drones, and medical zones as well. So that's going on in London, and 30,000 people or something are expecting through the door. Are all these people out there to buy weapons, or they are?
Yeah. While Syria goes on, we're proudly running this exhibition, but is it my imagination that the Chinese have now been slapped down for using, electric batons? Meanwhile, we've got British police tasering and killing people on the streets of Britain, so more hypocrisy by the British government. Well, what's happening with the EU, Mike?
This is quite maybe not very surprising, but this is Barroso sort of... how would you describe it? He's getting a bit aggressive again. He's really saying that anybody that wants to roll back the European Union risks returning to war and trenches. So, what can you say about it? It's typical Barroso rhetoric, I suppose. Let me say, all those who rejoice in Europe's difficulties and who want to roll back our integration and go back to isolation, the pre-integrated Europe of the divisions, the war, the trenches, is not what people desire and deserve. The European continent has never in its history known such a long period of peace. Blah, blah, blah. I mean, what can you say?
I think they're very worried that actually the truth's coming up to the surface. And I believe part of the insult was to call the Cameron's Conservatives UKIP, or UKIP the Conservatives. I'm not sure which. But I think the wheels are coming off the wagon on this one. Well, we've got some stuff on the NHS here to end off with, but that'll lead us into our discussions about children and social services.
Yeah, this is the Future Hospital Commission. They've produced a report about hospital care in the future, and I have to say that I'm not going to read them out now because we don't really have time, but I advise everybody to go and have a look at this. But the list of items that they've highlighted for how our future hospitals might be and how they might be organised and what they might do, and you're left with by asking the question at the end, how is this different from how it used to be? We seem to have gone through this period since I suppose the 1970s to now, where hospitals have gradually had any of the compassion that they ever held has been removed from hospitals. We've had these management teams and this change agenda going in and pushing a very different type of culture to the one that we had in the first 20 or 30 years of the NHS. And suddenly these guys are coming back and saying, in the future it would be better if hospitals worked like this. This is how it used to be. So, well, it's kind of a sort of pretty obvious moment there.
I think what we're witnessing is the change agenda, and that is that if you keep pushing change constantly, what you end up with is basically revolution. So you're going to go round in a circle, but it's the disruption and the chaos that the government is after at the moment, because in the documents that we are seeing across the public sector, the inference is that we need to disrupt the public sector in order to get the wider change in that the government wants. So we're going to suggest to the public that the decline of the NHS is actually driven from the inside with the objective of getting in the privatisation that the government wanted in the first place. And of course, Mike, you were the person to discover the common purpose cell working at the heart of the NHS and a wall of secrecy when we started to ask questions.
Yeah, that would be the Common Purpose Working Group, which nobody really wants to talk about for some reason.
No, exists, but we don't talk about it. Well, probably we can end here quite appropriately on the fact the Mail's reporting families fury as NHS Chief Executive at Centre of Hospital Baby Death Scandal steps down. So this is the common way that wherever there's a problem, we don't investigate properly, we dismantle the mid-staff's NHS trust so that we destroy the evidence as to what really went on. And if you know there's trouble coming, then you resign from your post But of course, if you read the small text here, of course, this man is going on to become a consultant in the private sector to actually advise the NHS. So is it really a reward that he's been doing his job, which is undermining and bringing down the collapse of the NHS, so that we can bring in a profit-centred system required by the Tories? We'll leave you to think about that.
Yeah.
Mike?
Yeah, just one more thing. To answer Harry Brown's question, Monitor is on the Common Purpose Working Group, although they claim that it has no fixed membership. Although in any of the documentation I've seen, Monitor is part of it. So whether it's fixed or not, I think is one of those questions that they don't really want to answer. Okay.
So the other thing we'd just say is anybody out there has got friends or relatives who have information or want to speak out anonymously if they prefer. We're very interested in information on the NHS and what is really happening and how staff are now being treated and bullied into towing the government line. So don't sit on the information, because if we can publish it and broadcast it, it does make a difference.
We're going to take a very short break while Mike gets Kevin Bull on the phone to discuss with Brian. And London event this weekend with Patrick and Ian, chemical warfare, fracking and chemical weapons. So that's in London this weekend. Check out Ian R. Crane's website.
Ian R. Crane's website, and that's the Connaught
and the Connaught Rooms, yeah.
Right.
I'm going with Sam the blogger, so we should be there doing a little bit of filming. So
okay. And keep doing what you're doing out there. We know that many people are starting to sign up with the Community Press Officer Scheme, which ex-police officer Dave Eden has been pushing. We're getting a lot of interest in that, and we are paying attention to the film reports that are being sent in, particularly in relation to people taking on the bailiffs.
Yes.
So we will be looking to use some of that information, but we can't do it straight away.
They're doing some great work up in Manchester. A friend of mine, Carl Cunningham's doing some great work up there, along with Keith. They're doing some great work with stopping the bailiff, so there's some videos to come from them as well. Okay, and the beauty of this is, of course, it's all done in a peaceful way, but caught on camera so that we can see exactly what these people are up to. Exactly. Okay, thank you for joining us for the news. Stay with us. We'll be joined by Kevin Bull afterwards to talk about Judge Mumby's decision in relation to the Staffordshire County Council child case. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, welcome back to UK Column Live, and I'm now joined by Kevin Bull from the Earth Needs Rebel show, who's going to be giving us some, I'm going to say, expert opinion, because that is the right expression, on the recent ruling of Judge Mumby, President of the Family Law Division, in relation to the Staffordshire County Council child case. Now, this, of course, is a landmark ruling. It's been quite widely reported in the mainstream press, but as we will be explaining in the interview with Kevin, that the public are not being told the truth about the full significance of this ruling, and that we need to know what the full significance is, because actually there has been a major breakthrough in exposing what is really going on within children's services. And I can say that watching some of the social workers' sites over the last few days, it's clear that there's a lot of angst now out amongst the profession about what this ruling means. And as we always say, we believe that most social workers are out there doing an extremely good job, but our own research and those of many other people are discovering that there is a cabal of people who are up to no good, and this includes inappropriate behaviour, cases and information in the court hearings themselves. So first of all, we'll just have a look at what the Independent said here. Family courts should be opened up, says top judge. And this is, as I said, Judge Mumby. And he said that there was a pressing need for more transparency in the system by letting in the glare of publicity. He said that the public had a right to know what is being done in their name. And of course, one of the things that we've continually said, as have many other campaigners against what is really happening in the family courts, is that you cannot understand this subject unless you've actually had the experience of going into one of these secret courts yourself. So this is where Judge Mumby's ruling starts to become of importance. We'll just put up a picture of this gentleman, and we're being kind to him because we're showing him as the man himself without the wig and gown. But it does appear that having considered a very difficult case, Judge Mumby has made a decision which seems to really adhere to the law, but in doing so is also now starting to really help families and other people who are trying to expose what is going on. Now, the Mail reported it in a slightly different way here. The video judges tried to block. Father secretly records harrowing moment, 6-year-old baby is taken away by social services. Now, I'm going to say, as a result of the hearing and in line with family court hearings, the normal procedure, we certainly cannot name the child, and we're not going to name the parents in this case, although their names have been widely posted on the internet. But it's interesting that the headline there says that it's the judges who tried to block the video, when the truth of the matter is that it was absolutely Staffordshire County Council. Where did the information come from? Well, the brave father took the video initially, but the video, as seen here, was then broadcast by the UK Column, and the UK Column was heavily cited in the court case, a fact which has simply not been admitted to in the national press. We also interviewed the father in order to find out exactly what his views were and why he had gone to the trouble of recording the taking of the baby. And what was the result of this? Well, Staffordshire County Council took this action. So the interview that we did and information about this child being taken, the video, which you can see quite freely if you choose the Daily Mail site, or indeed it's still available overseas, but most people have described it as absolutely harrowing. So at that point, I'm going to call in Kevin, and we'll simply work through the judgment to see what was really going on and what the real outcome of this case is. Kevin, are you there?
I certainly am, Brian. And I must say I agree with what you're saying. I've listened to you. It is what's actually happening. And this judgment by Sir James Mumby, being president of the family division, is a very senior judgment indeed. But not only that, he's taken a great deal of care in this to define in case law effectively the correct interpretation of the in-camera rule. Now, when we talk about the in-camera rule, we're referring to, we're not going to do very much law in this. We're going to try and keep this as an overview. The Children Act 1989, we're talking of Chapter 41, Section 97, which is covering most of what would be classed as the in-camera rule. And what we actually have here, first of all, is a clear sign from the judiciary, once presented with a case that could test it or could become, the judiciary, once given the ability of that case, are falling in line exactly with what they've declared, that they want to open up the transparency of the family law courts. And they're doing it in a certain way that is very fair, and they're not upholding the law. That's not happening. Don't be misled by that. There's been no change in law. There's been a change in case law with this new case law of this case, REJ. Now, having before the court so many areas in application of matters that were claimed by the applicant to potentially be a breach of the in-camera rules, etc. And therefore, an injunction was required to effectively remove video. Of course, that's not happened because the video was legally published, and the law is if a breach hasn't occurred at the time. And they also were trying, I think, to set an example with UK Column in particular in showing if they really went in heavy-handed and threatened the UK Column, as the local authority did. This is not the court, this is not judges that are doing this, that the UK Column would back down, that the UK Column would pull the video and the programme. And as you know, Brian, we worked together. Myself and Katie did the legal advice with International Rescue for Families in Advocacy for You behind what to do. And in this case, and we'll explain why as we go through it, to get a case where a judge can make the decisions, that was the way to put it, to make the decisions in many points of application, which could then be looked at within one case as to how we had to get the case before the judge without it being negotiated out by representation and barristers on each side, and by the parties volunteering before the judge had to decide on the balance, shall we say, of that, which is then a judicial decision. The important factor of this, Brian, I'll just give it you to this point, is a judicial decision set case law, because the judges decided against the law with arguments from both sides.
Kevin,
a voluntary decision does not, Brian.
Okay, Kevin, sorry just to interject there. We're getting a little bit of break-up on the transmission, so we're just going to ask if we can reconnect, I think.
Okay.
So what I will, while we're waiting for that to happen, because you've said a few things which are very important and they were actually cut out, so we'll just try we'll just try and get you back in. I've just to add a little bit to what Kevin is saying, is the critical thing about this is that one of the findings of this hearing is that the video that was posted, of course, was totally acceptable, but we've already seen the power of local authorities in that material is taken down or has to be taken down before there's actually been a court decision. Mike, are you there now?
I'm here. I've not got video on you, Brian. I've got audio but no video now, but that's okay. Okay. Are you getting video and audio on me now? We are. Okay, let's continue. Yeah. Right. Where did you get to when you got the interference, Brian? Do I need to recap me?
Well, I think if you gently would just explain again if I put it in my words, and then you can correct me, but essentially we've had Staffordshire County Council launching in to try, first of all, to bully us, but also others and the parents to take the information down. That's the usual procedure. They use their legal teams, funded, of course, by public money, to try and bully people to take the information down. But in this case, because we didn't, that then led them into a direct confrontation with the head of the Family Law Division.
Exactly. What if I overview it beyond that, Brian, and give a bit of detail behind that to understand that? What you were subject to is the potentially what behind the scenes mainstream media can be subject to. So can you see why mainstream media some of the time don't go with stories? Because they can't be sure what the legal situation would be if they stood the ground. Because there hasn't been a significant enough case, as you'll know from Lord Justice Mumby's, from James Mumby. In one case, he's had to revert to many cases to do his. We haven't got a situation that one case could easily be understood and interpreted against the in-camera rules. What we've got with Sir James Mumby's judgment, we can now do that. To get it was, and it wasn't just a problem for us. Behind the scenes, you would not know, but it would have been a problem for the judiciary, which has delayed them being able to do this. Now, I'll explain why. Not all things are black. Some things are problems that we don't understand unless you understand law and how it's developed in case law against law. Over time, it's constantly changing. In other words, each case that comes along can change through case law what the next case outcome might be before another judge, if those arguments are presented to him by one side or both sides in an argument decided both upon law and current up-to-date senior case law in the main, and high-level case law like this case. This is both current and very high level as we are. So that, once that's understood, I think a lot of people understand that, but I want to make sure everyone understands that it's not just as simple as having good and bad people. Things can look bad, but there are certain reasons that clever legal teams can lead the judge in a dance, in that the judge can only do certain things, because he has to respond according to the rules as like everyone else, and he has to respond according to law and what's presented to him. Now, if one side in a case does not make the right arguments, even though that case could be won, even though the judge might know some case law himself that could help that side, that is not his role. It's up. And that is how proceedings, if you like, are corrupted in the way that we see as parents and as people when we see these cases, by one side looking incompetent and not making the right arguments. And then we can see another case where it is won, and we look at the two and we'll say, why is that different? And that happens in all areas of law.
Right, but, so Kevin, if I may, just to see whether I've got what you're saying is right. The point you're making is that whatever we may feel about the family courts, and there is a lot of emotion out there about what goes on in the family courts, but you're making the point quite strongly that as the system stands at the moment, the judge can only make a decision on the information brought in front of him or her. And if one side, whether that is the public side or indeed it's the parents, can't bring the right information to bear in front of the hearing, even if the judge is a good, moral, upstanding person, they have to make a judgment on the facts brought in front of them. That's the first part of your argument.
That's true. Yes.
Right.
Now,
sorry. Continue,
go on, Ryan. Please go on.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Beyond that, that's a very simplistic view. Obviously, it's very complex beyond that, and we want to keep it at a level that's understandable to most people. We are going to go beyond this, I know, later, Brian. But the situation with that, then, even without going further, you'd understand, Brian, that without expert eye, you can't really tell where the case has been corrupted by the playing roles of the barristers and lawyers. To make an allegation of that is quite serious, really, because it's very hard to prove. We all recognise the argument that a person could sit at the back of the court knowing things about the case, have a barrister on, not speak, and want to tell the judge things that haven't been said. And because they don't get to the point of making sure that they are asked by their barrister, is there anything else you would like to add, or words to that effect, to have an opportunity to speak, they could see their children go without the arguments being put to the court that they know exist.
I think we've lost you again. We're really having some problems this afternoon.
Brian,
yeah,
can I suggest I change onto a separate Ethernet connection and see if it's my end or your end?
I think we'll wait for you to do that, because this subject is so important. If we can't have a good interview this afternoon, I think unfortunately we'll have to hold it, because we know that this case and the facts, this hearing rather, and the outcome is so important. And
okay.
So you do what you need.
I'll do that now, and we'll attempt to continue. It should improve the quality and the speed of the connection. Hold on.
Okay, well, we think we've got Kevin back again. I'm really sorry we're having this problem, but we're doing the best we can. Okay, Kevin, are you there?
I certainly am. It's just the challenge of alternative media and the internet, Brian, that we get, isn't it, from time to time?
It is, but that makes it part of the fun. And now we've got a camera warning, but we got rid of that one as well. Okay, so we're basically saying, first of all, we are analysing this in a very measured way, because we know there are huge problems within the family court system. But you've just been talking through the way the procedure works, and just to sum up once again, we're saying that basically it doesn't matter how good the judge is, that if they're not presented with the right information in court, then of course they can't make the right decision.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Now, to add on to that, the one important point, which you'll pick up in the papers as well, what do social services and their legal teams seem to do every time, the local authorities? They always blame the judge themselves. They say, well, the judge did not point this out, or the judge didn't do this. And they try to remove the decision from the fact they applied for this and fought for this in court with information that was loaded, obviously, and they then rely on shifting all responsibility, if they can, towards the judge. And that is not the case. It really isn't. There are good and bad in all, and that includes our judiciary. But I can assure you that if you look at it overall and you have an expert eye on it, there are problems. There are decisions made by judges that are absolutely outrageous. there is a problem with all professions that they self-protect anyway to keep the integrity of organisations and structures. Everything's the same, and that the judicial structure is also important to keep the credibility. So the language they used when they correct things at appeal is subtle, unless someone really, really brings it into disrepute, and then it can get a bit stronger, as we've seen in some cases. But what I want to add to that is a comment that has been put forward to suggest in the claims we've seen in various ways by Staffordshire County Council, that they pointed out that the judge in this case didn't find anything wanting, shall we say. They've applied this over their handling of the situation with the child. Now, let me clarify this for starters. These proceedings are about an injunction, and they're about the law to publish in the in-camera rules. They are nothing to do with family law proceedings that would decide whether what's happened with the children or not in this case, or even the local authority and their procedures around how these have happened. It's not for that, and the judge on this case would not really comment on that because the existing family law proceedings will be continuing anyway, and it's outside the scope of what his application is about and what he's hearing over whether or not the publication of information around this case and child proceedings in general, because of the case law, should or should not happen in all the different areas. So we're not hearing family law. So any of these arguments that you hear from the other side about it vindicating them aren't even relevant, because that's not what this case is about. Does that make that clear, Brian?
Well, Kevin, you've hit that point. I'll just bring this slide up. This is Philip Atkins, the leader of Staffordshire County Council, and this is what he had to say in the press. It is a groundbreaking ruling because the court has recognised and clarified the need to protect children's interests within the electronic world we now live. Ultimately, this ruling means that websites hosted in England and Wales must not publish information which identifies a child who is being protected by care proceedings. From now on, children will have the same protection for privacy in the electronic world as they do in print. Now, this was the line pushed very, very strongly by the council. What's your comment on that?
It's, shall we say, they're trying to protect their public image by altering by only partly explaining what the case is about in that. And also they have made, by explaining part of it, look like we've got a change in law over the situation of digital media. That's not true. That statement is so misleading. It's unbelievable. Well, let me explain. You will probably know, Brian, and listeners will know, that many injunctions by the Court of England, and rightly so, when children's identities have been revealed or there's been publications, whether that being an alternative media on digital sources, on written paper, or on television programmes, digital or mainstream, if anything happens and an application is made for an injunction and there has been a breach of the protection, if we're talking really specifically about, obviously, the in-camera rules here within the Children's Act 1989, as I referred to, Chapter 41, Section 97. If there's a breach and identifying the child, which would endanger the protection of the child while legal process is taking on afterwards, and then in that case, what would happen, an injunction is granted. And there are radio stations like my own radio station, I haven't been personally, in alternative radio, that have been subject to injunctions, and many other alternative organisations that have been subject to publication. As we obviously know, this has happened around certain organisations, providing they're in the jurisdiction, understand this, of the court without further enforcement. That would be the Court of England and Wales. They would have to either live in that jurisdiction, would be the main way it would be categorised as a private individual and disclose within the jurisdiction, and then they would come under the jurisdiction of the court, or they might have a business in the jurisdiction that is publishing in the jurisdiction as a business that is breaching the law, and therefore they're responsible as part of that and can be brought under the jurisdiction of the court. If you can't be brought under the jurisdiction of the court, then obviously your case can't be heard. unless enforcement is made in a different way in another jurisdiction, for example, America, in the particular state where a breach has occurred, then you have to enforce in that jurisdiction.
Right, Kevin, if I can just interject there. So we've got the situation where we have had perfectly good laws in place which have clearly said that if you're operating within the, I'm going to say the English jurisdiction, you are not allowed to name a child that's currently going through care proceedings, and it doesn't matter what the media is, whether it's a national newspaper, or it's national TV, or it's alternative, or it's posted on a website. The law has always been very clear on that.
It's about disclosure, not the method of disclosure.
Indeed.
It's nothing to do with that.
So Staffordshire here being totally disingenuous in that they're trying to say, well, actually, Staffordshire has achieved a landmark ruling on electronic media, when the facts are very clearly that there has always been a control by law over publishing the name and identity of a child in care proceedings. That's the nub of what you're saying. Is that correct?
Taking it slightly beyond that, just to further clarify, the 1989 Act that we're referring to, the in-camera rules, has always applied to all forms of media. There's been no change because of this judgment in any single form of how this is like the digital media. And if you read the judgment from end to end, you will find that is absolutely so. Because if this judgment redefined that it is a new method, a certain method to be taken into account, it would have to be specified within the judgment, and it doesn't exist in the order either.
Right. Well, we can say, of course, as the UK Column, that local councils have used injunctions on us in the past in order to stop the possibility of any reporting of child cases. And probably one of the most interesting ones for us was Plymouth City Council, that were prepared to put an injunction forward when we hadn't even spoken to the parents. So the injunction was put in place because they seemed to be so concerned that we might actually speak, interview and try and assist one of the local families. Terrible story, which we can't go into. But so we are very familiar with the fact that rules were already in place to stop the publishing of information which identified a child currently under child proceedings.
As I think many listeners will be, even, because there's enough, shall we talk of this in the media in other areas. What was actually happening in the mainstream media publications to date, and this is the first time we've had a chance to explain, because the mainstream media would normally consult all parties that were involved in this so that they could create a balance. They haven't done this. They are just printing what what you're reading, you'll realise it's just a print of what they're stating. So they're only consulting with who they want to consult with, the mainstream media, for the information of what's happened on the case. And of course, they're going to present whatever they want to present, or they're choosing to select who they're going to consult with, so that they are engaging in such a way that we all use the same argument with mainstream media. It's corporate, establishment, state-led influencers water down the real implications of this judgment, which is excellent. It's an excellent judgment, Brian. It is very fair indeed. It's way beyond what you're reading in the papers, and we need to explain why. That is, we also need to explain why Staffordshire County Council have made this argument about digital media. It's to camouflage the embarrassment of what they did. And they've shot themselves in their own foot and blocked every social services department in the country and everyone in family law by making the application the way they did, and the way we dealt with it in advising it, and you being strong enough to do it. The combination of that has resulted in every point going before the judge. That was very foolish from a legal tactical point of view, but excellent as far as parents, which is what we wanted to happen, Brian, as you know. Excellent for parents, because if the judiciary did really intend to open up the family courts, the first thing that needed to happen was, before you even change law, you need to make sure your present case law is in balance with the law. To do that, you can't just change it. You have to have a case that actually fits the requirement. What happened in this case met the requirement, and that's why it was sent up by another judge, I'm not going to expand on the names of everything, to Sir James Mumby, because it was recognised that this needed a very senior, careful deliberation, right, because it was ideal as a case that could form case law in line with what the judiciary are wanting to see.
Right, Kevin. Now, just hold that point. What I want to do is to bring in here for viewers and listeners to stress what Staffordshire County Council were up to. Staffordshire went into the court attempting to get a worldwide ban on anybody, certainly reporting the video, but they were also very upset about social workers being named. But the key part of this was that they went into the court saying that they wanted a worldwide ban on reporting. Now, what's your comment on that single point alone, that a council would try and do this?
They must be crackers. I'm sorry, but let me explain. Let me give an example. Case. There was a case, I'll just name it by the surname. It was an international law case in Ireland. The surname of the lady concerned was Wileman. And it's been quoted and banded around as a case that was won in Ireland in international law, yet behind it is something that happened in a different way, similar to what's happened in this case. And I'll explain it because it's simple. In the case concerned, which has been scratched because no order or judgment was ever made in the case in the end. There was no final hearing because the Social Services Department in England withdrew from the case just before the final hearing. As you know, we're in international law, so we were voluntary and international before the court at that time, the same court, in other proceedings. So I did speak to the lady briefly, but not in depth, but we've followed it since. And what the case was, it was about recovering a child to England, and there were two siblings that the recovery could only ever apply to one. In the Constitution of Ireland, it would be against the Constitution at that time in particular to split two siblings up and return one of the siblings to England, dividing the family. That's the constitutional law interpretation of Ireland. That was why the English local authority pulled out of the final hearing just before, because had they have continued, they would have done what Staffordshire County Council have done and made case law against their own interest that would then be used by other parents to recover, to stop recovery of children. Do you understand? Does that travel that way?
Yes, that's one point. The other part that I was trying to get at is, of course, the fact that we have a council that was so arrogant
that's right.
They felt they could confidently go into an English court. You correct me if I need to say British, but I'm going to say English court, and ask the judge to gag, for example, the whole of America. I mean, this defies common sense, even to somebody who's not trained in law, that a local council in England thinks itself so powerful that it can go into an English court and say to the judge, we want you to stop anyone, anywhere in the world, publishing this story.
Well, let me explain it in the way that, and it's very important this is, because it also explains why the case law has not been created so far. So let me explain why it was created first through this case and not any earlier case. As I've said, you have to have the right case before the court. You can't manufacture a case. It has to be real. So the judiciary, if they and everyone in the law have to wait until a case has developed the right case law for it to change in any direction that is a better interpretation of the law, or more current, or whatever, or more considering of all the factors. It's not a change of law, it's a subtle change of interpretation. And if there isn't much case law developing at all, it leaves the door open, Brian, just get this side first, for people like social services, their legal departments, to intimidate people, because no one has a point of reference on how a judge would really decide in the case over the in-camera rule until now, until Sir James Mumby has changed that with this case. And only this case to date could do it, because of the circumstances of the application and how we responded. And what I'm explaining is, before now, the mainstream media, as soon as they try to go with the story and that there's wind of it, or they check with the legal department, they generally can't go in most cases, because they get intimidated, just like you were threatened, and they're not sure what would happen. Even their legal departments aren't, should they take it on as a legal fight, because the case law's never been there and defined as well as Sir James Mumby has. We're thanked very much by the entire social services and local authorities of the UK, because this would have created the very case law we need to open up the courts properly in line with what the judges wanted to do, but properly through the law as it's been done by this case, by the failure of Staffordshire Social Services to be shrewd in law in their application, and then to push that application before the court when we guided you not to be present and not to be represented. Because if all parties had been represented and been present in the court, the whole application would not have needed to go before the judge, quite simply because it would most likely have been negotiated out between barristers, getting agreement between the parties in normal legal proceedings, so that the judicial decision is on a lesser extent once the negotiated parts are out of the proceedings. This is very normal, and that's how case law can be steered as well in its development. From one side or the other, they don't want to develop case law against one side. That's part of the battle behind the scenes. This council has been extremely foolish and arrogant, expecting this of the court, when the court have behaved properly and they've defined it exactly to the law in a very clear way, in an excellent judgment by Sir James Mumby. And this now leaves Staffordshire Council with the embarrassment. The real embarrassment is they've created the case law to protect parents and children, not just children really, because they're protecting the whole family with the case law, because of the transparency now means that all media can report, not just digital mainstream. All media can now clearly understand through this judgment that it is okay to report, and in line with this judgment they can take legal advice on it as well with the law very easily, and it opens the door to transparency, that it really is about not identifying children, not identifying items in the proceedings, in the home address, the family, and things that would lead to the identification of children. It is not for the purpose that Staffordshire County Council wanted, and social services use it, to hide the names of social workers, to hide the names of council officials, and to hide the names of lawyers and anyone involved in the proceedings that are often on the gravy train, that has created this awful problem, that has made the judges look like they're the people totally responsible. There are good and bad judges, it's just the same. There's people all the way in between. But that is not true. It is mainly a problem with social services, local authorities, and the people that are making money out of this, Brian.
Right. Kevin, just thank you for that. For people who may be unfamiliar with what we're really talking about with family courts, I'm just going to illustrate here really what families are up against when they go into these courts. Now, remember, they are secret. There is no press. There's no members of the public. You simply have mum or dad or both going into a court where this is what they're faced with. We just call up on screen. This is an arbitrary picture of a court. But if we just here show the number of people that are ranged up against a family fighting to keep their children. So we've got the local authority barrister, the local authority legal officer, their assistant, psychiatrist, CAMS representative, 3 social workers, guardian ad litem, a solicitor for the guardian, psychotherapist, your partner in some cases turned against you, and the judge. So you have mums and dads who go into these secret courts, no members of the public watching what's going on, no members of the press, and these we've got 13 people. Let's take the judge out. 12 people ranged against the parents in a secret hearing. This is really the nub of the matter, and so that people can understand the significance of the. Excuse me, just calling up something here. The significance of the Staffordshire hearing. This is the article that we did on the head of law in Staffordshire, a gentleman called John Tradewell. He's also Director of Democracy. We found this a fascinating title. It's democratic, but you direct it. But he's also heading for transformation. And the reason that we've been so interested in this gentleman is this is what he has said. Words out of his own mouth, excuse me. I beg your pardon. Let's do that again. Having a few troubles this afternoon. Here we are. So he's talking about the local authority, the new powers the local authorities has. A local authority has the power to do anything. I mean, that is a really incredible statement. Now, is this a throwaway line? Well, no, this all comes out of a document that this gentleman has written. We've made it available on the internet. But essentially, he goes through it, how the local authorities are getting more and more power. And he's saying that wise men and women, almost all of them lawyers, have debated about whether a general power of competence is the same, better or worse than a power of general competence. So this is legalese. Many people wouldn't understand it, but let's focus on the basic words. This head of legal services in Staffordshire Council believes that his local authority can do anything. And he really rubs it in by saying that as well as freeing us from Parliament, the power will give us independence from government. We, not Westminster, and just highlight that again, we, not Westminster, know what's in the best interests of our people and our communities. So here is the man who was putting together this case, which has ultimately gone in front of Judge Mumby. And this man, in his own words, fully published within the UK, is saying that he believes that his council has the power to do anything. And I think what you've described, I think, as arrogance by Staffordshire, well, this is where it's stemming from. I don't know what your comment on that would be, Kevin.
Obviously, analysing the gentleman himself is part of this as to where he's coming from. Whether he's got a consensus on this, we can't tell for sure. We can only look at what's written and what he's saying. But certainly he's displaying that he's out of touch in expectations as to the power of a local authority in this case, because that has been proved by the case itself and the content of Sir James Mumby's judgment, which, by the way, I know we're going to cover in more depth later. It does itemise within the judgment all of the things that they applied for that were not granted by the court in the correct legal way as well. And that then makes case law against all of those items. When someone takes a case, a parent takes the case to court, if they're self-representing, if they've got legal advocates, if they've got a legal team, those points can be argued from Lord Justice or Sir James Mumby's judgment if they came under challenge over publication, if they were in line with his judgment and the in-camera rule. And I want to add one other thing so we don't get confusion here. This is just about the in-camera rule interpretation in proceedings to protect the children. There are other orders made by judges that go further than this in certain cases, i.e. it might be protecting someone who's vulnerable, it might be an adult and there's a violent person involved. In any case, orders can be made by any judge that would protect that, and that would be a special addition and not a general cut thing. So you would have to look for that as well if there's any special restrictions, both by the judge's orders and the judgments, to look carefully there. And you also, before going with any documents, it does indicate in the judgment as well that you can really pretty well publish anything from the proceedings, including, this is the remarkable thing, not just the judgment and orders of which first thought would happen, you can actually publish documents from within the proceedings that do not identify and breach the law and do not cross in the in-camera rule law in line with Sir James Mumby, and also must not breach any other orders or any standard conditions of the court. Like certain contact orders have standard conditions. You will see on them that if a parent leaves the country with a child for more than 28 days, they will be in a situation of being in breach for that, and children are then returned in international law cases in such circumstances by England social services applying to that country for a return of the child for wrongful retention, because the breach occurs 28 days after they left the country, according to the document. So this has to be looked at carefully, and you need to read each document, listeners do, to look for exclusions and take legal advice. Legal advocates are good as well, because legal advocates, especially if they're voluntary, we're voluntary, but we've moved more into media these days. Legal advocates don't have an agenda other than to protect the family unit and to get the right outcome on that, to protect the children involved in the case. And because that's the case, they're not making money. They're not steered by a gravy train, for sure, if they're voluntary. And the problem we've got with all of this, it is the money incentive. As we found out from the John Perugine social worker, CPS social worker in America, 13-year social worker, in the interviews I conducted with him on the Earth Needs Rebel show at that time. That's on threethinkingvoice.org archives. If you want to search for that, you can. But that's the same here. It's exactly the same story. And this is now being revealed more by this judgment, that the attempts to block the publication of the social workers' names in this case, and there's so many people under the in-camera rules, was completely inappropriate. It's to protect children. We always thought it was. We just didn't have a good enough case law like this made by the judiciary, where we could see it in one case, go into court with a document ourselves, go to the media with Lord Justice, Sir James Mumby's document, because this is what he intends. That's why he read it in open court. He wants this to be known so that people know not to breach it and know that they can publish on social service and anyone that's doing anything wrong here or doing anything good. So why not also, if you get a good social worker that does do it right, because we need good people, let's show that as well when it's published. If we get someone that's not doing it right, we need that publishing to protect the children.
Right, Kevin.
Because otherwise we'll lose more children.
Kevin, that of course is such an important point. What this is really about is ensuring that by transparency we can actually see that social workers are doing what they should be doing. We know that there are excellent people in that field. They work in a very difficult environment. But what has been happening over many years is parent after parent after parent, different counties, different parts of the country have been coming forward saying that social services have been making up the legal case in order to take their child unlawfully. And parents who we have seen many years ago, the First Lady who came to see me from South Wales, Linda Lewis, arrived with 2 suitcases of court documents which absolutely proved her daughter had been taken from her unlawfully, and the evidence was in the papers. But of course, when Linda, if we just use her as an example, attempted to try and get the truth out into the open, all that happened was the local authority and, of course, the local social services step in with yet more attempts to put gagging orders or injunctions in place to simply stop the parents telling the truth. So the importance here we're now starting to see with this judgment is that people can identify the court paperwork. They're not going to identify the name of the child, but they can now bring the paperwork into the public domain. And of course, it is the paperwork that forms the evidence as to what actually went on in the court hearing. So, for example, where we have many, many parents across the country, one of the things that many of them are enraged about are psychiatric reports or clinical psychologist reports, which are clearly fabricated, where these so-called experts have never, ever even met the families, and yet they are producing a report on an individual they've never met, and that's being put into court. Or we hear time after time parents saying that social workers simply lie in the court. They use hearsay as if it was evidence. I have personally experienced in a court a social worker trying to say that I was in one part of the country forcing my way into a contact centre, when in fact I've never been to that particular contact centre, and on the day in question I was 150 miles away in Plymouth. But what was the reaction to that fabricated accusation? It's simply a mistake. But of course, if the parents make a mistake, then we have the 12 legal people ranged against them, all paid out of the public purse, coming down. Now, the evidence that this is all going on, Judge Mumby has now started to give parents and the wider public the tool so that they can start not only to see what is going on, where it's going wrong with county councils, local authorities, social workers, but they've now got the means to bring that into the public domain. And once again, we're going to see exposure is the thing which brings the house of cards down.
I think, Brian, it's more important to understand why this has changed now as well, because it's how it's always been blocked. You see, I believe the judiciary have wanted to do this for some time, certainly since the time they announced, before the time they announced they wanted to open up the transparency of the courts, because it's been awful. And the complexity of it is that there's a lot of this that people believe a judge can order everything and anything, and he can just see things in the case, and it doesn't have to be because the process isn't completely understood. Then people outside law or don't understand the courtroom process and aren't really experienced in seeing it, then will automatically conclude that the judge has gone against them. But when it's often the legal team representation that has failed, and intentionally, and I want to reiterate in this why UK Column were important in this. Legal firms work for both local authorities and parents. They change their hats. It's normal. But it's local authorities behave badly. And just like with experts, they have a Dutch auction for experts that give them what they want. And those experts disappear when they're found to be corrupt eventually in proceedings, as we've seen. I won't name them now. There's plenty of cases and media to look at. But they are the worst possible people in a Dutch auction who are willing to, shall we say, load their evidence, and they bring disgrace to the rest of the professions who do not view it this way. I interviewed doctors in America. I'm interviewing a psychiatrist who totally disagrees with this false expert situation and may come forward and talk about it in greater detail as a professor of psychiatry. And it brings a bad reputation for people around social services and local authorities and these people, and makes the whole system look like everyone in it is absolutely awful, when we've got a lot of them in it in particular places that are really bad people. They are selfish, they have personality issues, I believe, that are so selfish they have no empathy left, and they don't consider people other than their own selfish gain in the gravy train, which lots of people are reporting. But where UK Column's important in parallel to explain why it's never happened until the social services attacked UK Column, it happened because of this. Every time the mainstream media and everyone, even the alternative media, have backed down, or they've not had the right legal advice and they've been served an injunction and then they've had to back down, or they've got to appeal it, they've got to fight it, you see. So really, social services have had the way in convincing everyone with these injunctions that the law's one way round until we get Sir James Mumby's judgment. But for a judge to judge, I want to reiterate this, it couldn't happen unless you've got the application with all the arguments before the judge. So in a normal case, what social services have been doing, just like any other area of law, if this came up in a case around an injunction, they would very cleverly like the Angela Wildman case I referred to in international law, Hague Convention in Ireland, they would very carefully pull out even or water the judgment, water the application down before the judge has to make a judicial decision on points. Thereby, only the points of the judicial decision make the case law, and any voluntary exchanges don't, because it's not a judicial decision, it's an agreement, a voluntary agreement. It can even be outside the law, a voluntary agreement, by the way. Now, what I'm saying to you is, when we talked together, Ryan, I know it took a lot of deciding what to do here. And when we advised you legally on it, with us not being lawyers, we had no vested interest other than to protect the situation of what you were trying to do was to publish legally. So your organisation is not about making money. It's about providing a service for the public and protecting the public in alternative media in the same way. So with us coming together, this meant that we were really more concerned about the parents' rights and about the situation of changing the situation of this awful problem with social service and local authorities behaving like this in this arrogant way, attacking everyone and frightening everyone. So you and Mike, and I want to explain, obviously this is from behind the scenes, bravely followed our advice and decided not to surrender. You decided you were going to follow the advice, which was not to go in and fight it unless you needed to appeal, but to not be present or be represented, so that the negotiation stage could not take place. There's no one there. So the application either has to go before the judge in its entirety, or Staffordshire would have to ask to have it reduced by the court or withdraw it. We thought that gambit meant they'd either withdraw or they would water it down or they would put the full application in. But we couldn't guarantee they were arrogant enough to put the full application in. And of course they did.
Right. That's
what the judges needed. They've waited for this for a long time. They got the chance to judge it themselves, and they behaved exactly in line with what they said to open up the transparency in the courts by proving that the case law has not really been interpreted correctly by social services and everyone until this judgment, as defined it in a judicial way.
Kevin, we've got 15 minutes to go, and there's a couple of points I wanted to bring in, but to reinforce what you've just said. Now, I can't show this document to camera, but what I can do is give you an idea of the scale of it. We're talking several pounds of paperwork here from Staffordshire County Council. This, of course, represents hundreds of thousands of pounds of taxpayers' money, which has been used by Staffordshire County Council in an attempt to gag the world, to injunct the world, to stop them reporting what their own social services have been really up to. And I'm going to say at this point that I believe that one of the reasons that this case has come about is because the video footage that the father took at the time, which of course he was quite lawfully entitled to do in his own home, but I believe that the video footage he took made a direct impact on Judge Mumby. I can appreciate that many judges, they have been working in the family courts for many, many years. As you have just told us, they have to make a judgment on the information produced in front of them, but they have not really ever known about what goes on at the front end. And of course, in the video, which many people from across the world described as horrific, in that video, we were starting to see what is really going on in the front end, where social workers are coming into people's homes. They're unknown individuals, they're faceless individuals, but supported by big burly policemen, and children are being taken away. And when parents attempt to speak up and say what is going on here is wrong, the evidence that local authorities are putting forward to take my child is wrong, all that happens, of course, to date is that local authorities produce pounds of legal documents in order to scare off the parents and indeed the media. And I can tell viewers that we found it very interesting over the last few days that we've had, once again, mainstream newspapers and even the BBC coming to the UK column because they want us to help them understand more about the story. Now, of course, our reaction is we are going to try and help them because it's vital that more people in the press and media do understand what's been going on in the family courts. But we also find it very, very interesting that the BBC, with a budget, of course, of billions, has to date failed to get out there on the ground and do some positive investigative journalism to understand why these children are being taken. And that leads me into your point, of course, that at the end of the day, what we are looking at is money. We have repeatedly said that the national child trafficking system, which is what I prefer to call it, the minimum amount of money changing hands is 20 billion, and that's simply around the family court. But of course, when we bring in care homes and charities that say they are there with the best interests of children at heart, we're seeing multi-million pound companies, 200 million pound companies, boasting of increasing profits of up to another 5 million a year. So we believe that what's happening is based on money. We believe that within much good work by social services, we're looking at child trafficking. And we also believe that people at very high levels in government are well aware of what's going on. And before I come back to you, I think perhaps I should also say we've been very interested to see MP Sarah Tether, Lib Dem MP, who was previously looking after the Children's Services portfolio. She has stepped down from politics. But of course, we never got an answer from that lady as to what her role in commissioning children's services was. So we simply asked, have you got a role to make profit out of children? She never replied, but we understand that lady's now stepped down and there are some reports that she is not well at the moment. So we've 10 minutes to go, Kevin. Just bring us back. Can you lead us into really a very simple bullet point recap of what the main points of Mumby's judgment are? And in particular, can you emphasise how parents can now use this in order to get justice within their own family court cases?
Certainly, Brian. Taking on board what we said in the programme without me reiterating how it's taking place and why it's taking place, the importance of this is also by the intention of what Sir James Mumby has done. This is why I read it in open court as well. It's no good reading something in, restricted court and a privacy court, because obviously you're never going to have the effect of making it travel. So his intention is to make it travel. So that tells us all that his judgment in this case, J, as far as the judgment side of it, which protects automatically the children, is for public disclosure. It can be put on websites, it can be published in all the mainstream media, and the alternative media. We're exactly the same. There's no difference between us under the law. And that means that by using that judgment, and if you pull out the section, the other part of it, which is Chapter 41 of the 1989 Children's Act, Section 97, that's the law on in-camera rules, and you then use this judgment together. If you sit and even study the judgment, because the way that Sir James has written it is carefully written this is, I think, why he reserved the judgment as well. He's carefully written it so that it's as understandable as it can be to as many people as possible. And that's very helpful when you talk of something that matters to parents and people outside of law as much as it does to people in law, probably more so. And this now allows parents to really understand themselves to quite a degree before they even go to a legal advocate or a lawyer for advice of what the situation might be. But don't fall into any traps What I'm saying is, don't think this is black and white and you can therefore do anything you like. You need to make sure you understand it. And if you're not sure, you need to take legal advice from an advocate or a lawyer. Because if you do get it wrong and you break the in-camera rule, then you will be subject to the court if an application's made, like it has been to UK Column. It is meant to protect children as well, but it's not protecting children any different from what it was originally meant to do when the law was drafted in the 1989 Act. What it's doing as far as publication and as far as protecting children is concerned, it is defining it in one judgment in the main now, in a situation that parents, lawyers, and anyone involved in family law and the media themselves, alternative or mainstream, can now look at it and get an understanding of what they can and can't do. So if social services come banging on your door and say you can't name social workers, just show them Sir James Mumby's judgment, because it states you can. Well, if they say you can't name their staff, it states you can.
Right. Kevin, that's at that point, thank you for just coming in there. I just want to bring this one up on screen. This is the British Association of Social Workers. They have already made comment on this hearing, and I'd encourage people to go to their website to read it, because once again, their comment is totally about social workers. It's not to do with the children. What they're saying is Lord Justice Mumby is wrong. It's outrageous that social workers should be named. Of course, social workers always do the right thing. Of course, they always produce the right evidence in court. So very, very defensive. This is the lady speaking, Bridget Robb, who's the chief executive. Interestingly enough, when we went to the British Association of Social Workers yesterday and asked if they would give us some details of their governing board, there's only names listed on the website. They were very, very reluctant, and to date we still have no details as to who these people are. We don't even have a sort of paragraph CV. So we have an organisation which has set itself up not only as a national guidance body for social workers, but also globally. So do go and visit their website, and we can see that social workers are very, very nervous about what's happened. And there's another lady who's been speaking out called Amy Norris. She acts as a spokesperson for the... the name's gone out of my head. I'll come back to it in a minute. But basically, she's been speaking out about the judgment as well, heavily criticising it. But we picked up that this lady is one of the journalists used by The Guardian. And here we are. She was actually speaking out for the College of Social Work. And again, I'm showing you their website where they have board members listed, but all you get is a name. When you ask for transparency, who are these people? What's their experience? Why should we trust them in what they're doing? Well, the College of Social Work doesn't want to answer. But we did notice that on their own website, people had answered their criticism of the Mumby ruling. And this one sums it up. It says, if social workers are acting in accordance with the law, the principles of natural justice and their code of ethical practice, then they should have nothing to fear from such exposure. What would your comment be, Kevin, on social workers who are frightened of Judge Mumby's ruling?
Well, I would say that what they're going to find as this pans out, as we go forward and media changes so that it does publish more, because this is opening up to the media, and they do publish legally and they get it right more and more, and they publish with greater detail, including naming the people that they're allowed to name. The officials put in charge of this should be under scrutiny in the public media, and they should be able to be named. And I'll explain to you why. If I can quote the Len Lawrence case, and it's something Len Lawrence, within that case, the case on aerotoxic poisoning, we've both covered, Brian. Len was speaking to the police when everything had gone wrong in that case. And it had all the awful troubles which we told. I'm not going to go into that. And the police officer said to him, basically that when the legal system has not have given you an answer to this, the only other place you can go is the media. Of course, Len tried that, but he had to come to alternative media, to ourselves and you, Brian, to reveal this, which we're still dealing with in series now. Now, if Len had been subject to this, he wouldn't have a media to go to where the judiciary could then look back at public reaction and everything themselves and be able to see, even outside the court, beyond what was presented to them. Remember, they can only really decide on what's presented, the law and case law. If things were not right, they would be able to see it the same as us. They couldn't bring it into a decision in a case, but they would get a flavour of whether that transparency is working with the media in a positive way or not. I believe it will, especially if people start reporting the good things that local authorities, social workers, or anyone in law does, as well as the negative things, because that then is true transparency. At the moment, we've had a situation that we just get reported in mainstream media what the local authority says, or what a certain legal team says, but not really what the parents say. And I'm ignoring cases that there's special releases on. And what this means is the mainstream media has been bowing down to the power of the money. Not that they're being paid off, that they're frightened of the consequences is one part of this, plus there's other interests pushing papers as well, we know, in the media.
Right.
With this way round, Brian, if I can just add on to the end of it, this way round now, this removes that excuse. So if anyone can't get their case published when it really matters, and they have to come to the alternative media like any of us, Brian, myself, or anyone else in alternative media to publish still, and that is illegal publish, you've got to ask yourself, what on earth are mainstream media doing when the courts have opened up transparency and they're not being transparent?
Thank you for that, Kevin. I'm just going to reply to that. We know what mainstream media are doing because the BBC pulled its investigative reporter off the child abuse going on around Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. This is the same BBC, of course, riddled with paedophilia, so we can hardly look to the BBC to get into this area. But I do believe some of the other mainstream journalists are starting to wake up. Finally, a comment that's just come in on the screen by me. Somebody is saying, well, of course, many MPs are now ex-social workers. I think that's a very significant point. But I'm looking forward to you joining us again, and we'll cover more detail, including the United Nations and impact on our child and family courts. So thank you very much for joining us, Kevin.
Thank you for having me, Brian.
And for our viewers and listeners, thank you as well. We will be continuing this with more detail, as this is really only the tip of the iceberg. So some good news from the UK column this Thursday. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.